순서는 맥윌리엄 박사님께서 강연을 해주시겠습니다. 이제 증거기반 조기개입협회 창립 이사이며 알라바마대학교 특수교육학과의 교수로 재직 중이십니다. 학술 분야에서의 왕성한 활동뿐만 아니라 영유아와 영유아의 가족과 함께하며 전 세계에서 활동을 하고 계십니다. 큰 박수로 맥윌리엄 박사님을 맞아주시기 바랍니다.
Good afternoon. Very good. Let's try it again. Good afternoon. There you go. I am delighted to be here in South Korea. It's my first time, and I am overwhelmed by how kind and friendly the people are. That's my first impression. My second impression is the food is phenomenal. So today I'm going to be talking about, you can see here, let me get the right button, a cross-cultural approach to early childhood intervention. First, I would like to thank Ginny Che, Dr. Che, for inviting me here and for the Korean Interdisciplinary Council on Early Intervention. They have been fantastic hosts, and what a great opportunity for me to learn from Koreans about culturally sensitive ways of providing early intervention. One of the reasons I wanted to talk about this topic is because some people think that the approach that I'm going to be discussing is an American approach, and it's not. It was at the beginning, perhaps, but I implement this model in many different countries with different cultures, different ethnicities, and so on. And in every place, I make adaptations to fit that culture. At the same time, trying to preserve fidelity to the model. So let's move ahead with this. Oh, look at this. EIEIO. That is the Evidence-Based International Early Intervention Office. I established that office at the University of Alabama. And so my dean, my former dean, always said it was the only smart thing McWilliam has ever done was to name his office the EIEIO. So you know what that refers to, right? You're going to help me. Old MacDonald had a farm. That's it. Okay. All right. How can we turn the tide of professionally driven services to caregiver-driven supports? And why should we? So I would argue that early intervention for years has been a professionally driven practice. Oh, sorry, I'm moving. Do you want me to stay still? We have set the agenda about what's going to happen in visits very often. We have sometimes even chosen goals for the children. And we think that we need to start rethinking this professionally centered approach to practices and make it more caregiver driven. You're going to see in a minute why the importance of caregiver driven supports is so important. So here you see 7 circles. They were drawn with my very fancy graphics program. And what do you suppose the 7 circles represent? You can answer in Korean if you want. Who said that? 7 days, there you go. Yes, of course you know. So here are the 7 days of the week. And what is this little thing here? This is the early intervention visit. So look at that in the context of the child's whole week. It's nothing. It's one little sliver in there. And even if you shaded out the portions of the day that the child is asleep, there would still be a lot of white space. In Taiwan and Singapore, they always talk about McWilliam's white space. Don't forget McWilliam's white space. The white space is all the learning opportunities that the child has when we are not there. And where do children learn? When we're not there. Working with a child under the age of 6 for 1 hour or less has very little effectiveness. Little kids don't learn the way older kids or adults learn. They learn through their everyday interactions with the environment, which is their families and their materials in the home. So if all of that learning is happening through the regular routines, who is really the interventionist? It's the caregiver. The parent or whoever else is looking after the child. So, what should we do with this? What are we going to use this for? To build the capacity of the caregiver. We don't say to train the parent or to teach the parent, because that treats the parent like a child. Parents are our equals. And so we use the term, we collaborate with them, we consult with them collaboratively. It's a different mindset from thinking of parents as trainees to thinking of them as partners. My first job in early intervention in the year, it was actually 1980, was I was in my 20s, and I was given my business cards, and it said, Robin McWilliam, parent trainer. And I was younger than some of the parents that I was going to visit, and at that time I had no children, and parent trainer was the worst thing they could have called me, really. And so I managed to get the title changed to Family Resource Specialist. Sounded better. Okay, so let's go through some principles of the routines-based model. I thought this was going to have Korean on it. Who has Korean in it? Textbook, okay. Okay, your booklets have the Korean in it? Got it. It's easier for me. Yeah. All right, the first one is, back up. All the intervention occurs between visits. Think about that statement for a minute. All the intervention occurs between visits. So that must mean that I am interpreting the word intervention to be what the child receives. And what the family receives is services or supports. But if we always remember that all the intervention occurs between visits, then we can remember what we should use the visit for, which is to prepare the family to be able to fulfill their responsibilities as parents. I often say that good early intervention is actually a parenting program. Second, the family sets the agenda. So the family sets the agenda in two principal ways. One is they choose the goals for their child and for themselves. So the plan is something that the family has chosen with our support. Because families have a very hard time just answering the question, what would you like as a goal for your child? That's a very difficult question for families. But if you do have a conversation with them about the child's needs, then they are able to identify what they want their child to be able to do and what they want for themselves. The second way that the family sets the agenda is at each visit. Whether the visit is a home visit, or even if the family has to come to an office or a clinic, it still can be a routines-based, family-centered, functional visit. And we start the visits by asking, how are things going? Normal social beginning. And then we say, is there anything new you'd like to talk about? That helps the family think about maybe something that they want to talk to us about. And if they don't have anything new, then we proceed through what they picked in the previous visit to be the topic for today's visit. So the family sets the agenda is the issue there. Third, Parents are competent adults. They're not children. They're not incompetent adults. They are competent adults. And so we respect their opinions, their priorities, and so on. Even if the family says something or chooses something that we might not have chosen, if that had been our child, we have another principle. Is it on here? No. One of our sayings is, whose child is it? And that dictates a lot of our approach to families. Next, family consultation is how we work with families. So this is similar to what some people have called coaching, but I prefer the term family consultation or collaborative consultation. It indicates that we are working with the family to arrive at strategies that they can use with their child. We don't just give them suggestions and expect them to say, oh, that's a good idea, yes, I'll do that. Because, as you all know, sometimes that doesn't happen. They say yes, and you go back the next time and you can tell they haven't done it. So we don't want that kind of relationship with families. We want an honest relationship. So when I ask a family, do you think this strategy that we just talked about will work? And they say, no, I don't think it will. That's good news that they say that, because now I am not expecting them to do it. They have been able to express what they feel, and we can find another strategy, one that they do feel will work. Now, I know in some cultures there is a profound respect for professionals and a lot of politeness on the part of families. And so I know it's very American to be able to say, nah, I think that's a bad idea. But we do want a good, honest relationship between professionals and parents so that parents really do get the help that they want. And that means developing strategies with them, not for them. The two-bucket principle. The two-bucket principle says that a parent can only fill their child's bucket to the extent that their bucket is full. I'll say that again. A parent can only fill their child's bucket to the extent that their bucket is full. So families need to have life going well for them to be able to be the parents they want to be for their children. So that's why we have goals on our plans that include things like the parents will have one night out every 2 weeks for themselves, or the mother will go begin a university education, or the father will play golf one time a week. People might say, what does this have to do with early intervention? It has to do with family life and quality of life. And if we only are interested in child functioning, then that is a child-centered approach, not a family-centered approach. Okay, and then finally, we provide support-based visits. And the 3 kinds of support that we are trying to provide at each visit are emotional support. So that means being positive with families, being responsive to families, oriented to the well-being of the primary caretaker, who is often the mother, being friendly with the family, and being sensitive with the family. Trying to walk in their shoes to understand what their life is like. That and confidence and encouragement is what we mean by emotional support to the family. Just as important, we need to ensure that families are getting their own emotional support, not just from us. We're professionals. We're the formal supports that families have. Their informal supports are actually more powerful. Now, this is a very interesting concept in countries that have a high priority on services. They think that the child has needs. Maybe they remember the family might also have needs. And so they want to know, well, what services are in place? I'm doing it like this because on the eco map, we put the formal services on the bottom. But families have their own informal supports, like extended family, neighbors, friends, and those people are also providing a lot of the support to families. And the research on social supports shows that the long-term well-being of children and families is better predicted by their informal supports than it is by the formal supports. Formal supports come and go. Informal supports tend to be more stable and also closer to the family. So that's emotional support. The second one is material support, making sure that the families have the things that they need to run their family life the way they want to. So for families in poverty, that means making sure that families have stable housing, they have clothing for the children for different times of the year, that they have access to food, that they have access to diapers or nappies, same thing. That's basic needs. But then there are other kinds of material needs that some children need, which have to do with equipment that helps them in their functioning in everyday routines. Maybe supported seating, for example, adapted spoons so they can hold the spoon better, all of those kinds of adaptations that might be needed. That comes under material support also. And finally, informational support. And what is it that families want information about? Well, they want information about child development sometimes. They want to know, what should a child, my child's age, be doing right now? What's normal for a 17-month-old or whatever the age of the child? They also are interested in what comes next. Right now, he can stand up and stand independently. What comes next? Well, maybe taking a few steps, walking. That's part of child development information. Another kind of information they want is information about supports or resources. They want to know what kinds of resources are available in the community for my family, including my child. So I always think about, with our daughter, I have two children, one has disabilities and one does not. The one who has disabilities is hard of hearing, among other things. The one without disabilities is hard of listening. Does that joke translate? Okay, so we were always very interested when our daughter, our younger daughter actually, started developing, her teeth were growing in. What dentist was in our community who was really good at working with little kids? Nothing to do with early intervention, but a lot to do with family life. Resources are what families are often interested in. You might think of them as services, because sometimes families want to know what services are available to my child, and I want every service that's available, as much of it as possible. That's what they think at the beginning. But then start talking to parents of 11, 12, 13 years of age, and the parents say, I don't know why I put myself through all that torture trying to get so many services for my child. So the services are necessary, but it's how we provide them that we really need to start paying attention to. Another piece of information that families want is what to do with my child. How can I help my child? And there are some parents who think that the way to help the child is to be their child's chauffeur or accompanier, taking the child to one service and waiting out in the waiting room while the child gets the service. That's ridiculous. That should be banned. So they think that doing the best for your child is getting your child to services, rather than understanding that you're a parent. You're already teaching your child. All parents teach their children. And what we can do is help that parenting be effective for children who have special needs. So this is the routines-based model in a graphic form. So the first part is, this says needs assessment and intervention planning. And so there are 4 parts to it. We develop an eco map with the family. That's that map I was telling you about that shows informal supports and formal supports. Then we do a routines-based interview, which I'll talk about each of these in a bit more detail later. The RBI is the way we assess needs by interviewing the family about their routines. Then we develop participation-based child goals and family goals. So these are functional goals for children that emphasize functioning or participation in each routine of the day, or each routine that the family cares about, but also family goals. And then from that we create a matrix, and that is a grid that has the goals down the left, the routines across the top, and X's in the routines that are targeted for each goal. We use a primary service provider approach, and that means one professional from any discipline is the main point of contact for the family. And that person is not working alone. That person has other team members to help as needed. So the other team members from other disciplines can give consultation at the office or wherever, but can also go on joint visits with the primary service provider. And we have a saying that because of the research that shows that the longer the relationship the family has with an early intervention professional, the more the family is pleased with early intervention and benefits from it. So our saying is, you only change PSP, primary service provider, upon death, meaning we don't change. So what happens in a lot of places is that the first concerns that you see in an infant might be motor concerns. And then those get resolved, and then we have language concerns. So it's tempting to think that we should start with a physical therapist and then move on to a speech-language pathologist. But that's not the way it works in our model. We decide on a professional based on a number of criteria, and that person stays with the family until they leave the program, even as needs of the child change. Because a primary service provider should be able to help with all areas of development and functioning, or get help from teammates, professional teammates. Okay, and so then that person is going to provide routines-based visits in homes. We also can provide routines-based visits to classrooms when a child is in daycare or in a preschool program where the teacher is the caregiver. And we can also do it in clinics. I resisted any clinic-based services for a long time because it's not a natural environment. But in some of the countries that we work, we've been unable to kick the professionals out of their clinics. So we had to develop a way to make even clinic-based visits family-centered and functional. So the point of the routines-based visits is to make the interventions caregiver implemented. And the word caregiver is covering, remember, parents and teachers. So that means the interventions are happening in everyday routines. This tends to have 2 kinds of outcomes. One is it increases family confidence. And we have instruments for everything. So we have an instrument for family confidence. We call it the FAMCON. But even if we weren't measuring it, we know that the construct of family confidence is very, very important, that we're building families' confidence, because we're working with children in the first years of their lives. The family is going to be involved with them for a long time after we're no longer there. And when family confidence increases, so does family quality of life. And caregiver implemented interventions also lead to children attaining the goals that were on the plan. And we have to do that because families chose those as things that they thought were important for their child and family. And also, this method of intervention leads to functioning in routines. And functioning, we always categorize as engagement, independence, and social relationships. And we have an instrument called the MISER for that, and I might talk about that in just a minute. You don't need to read any of this right now, but I did want you to know that the routines-based model has been internationally implemented. And these are some of my colleagues in different countries. And the main countries that we talk about are New Zealand, Australia, Taiwan, Singapore, Poland, Spain, Portugal, Paraguay, United States, Canada, and Korea. So now that I've been to Korea, I think I'm just going to add that onto the list. This is repeating the point that the model is not limited to one culture. It is considered a cross-cultural model. Here is the website for our EIEIO, and it has many, many materials on it in different languages. And so you should go to this website, and if you're interested in one of the instruments that maybe is in English or Chinese or something, and you want to translate it to Korean, write to me, and we would really welcome that. What I usually do is I then pass it along to another Korean person to make sure that, it was right. And this gets very important in Spanish, because the Spanish spoken in Spain is different from the Spanish spoken in Central America, which is different from the Spanish spoken in different South American countries. So we have to find a form of Spanish that works for everybody. By the way, some of you might know about Mandarin, for example. In Taiwan, they use traditional Mandarin, traditional Chinese. In mainland China, they use simplified. And so one of my colleagues in Taiwan is adding simplified Chinese to our materials. All right. Potential answers to how we can turn the tide of professionally driven services to caregiver supports. One is how we assess child and family needs. Instruments, tools have their place if you want to know what a child's developmental status is compared to other children. That would be a norm-referenced test, for example. Or how many skills on a curriculum a child has. That would be a curriculum-based assessment. But neither of those tells you what the child needs for successful functioning and participation in everyday life. So we need to change our needs assessment process. The role of service providers. So you heard me talking a bit about that with the primary service provider, that service providers in our field should keep their hands off children. Service providers in our field should keep their hands off children. Now, I don't really mean that. I just said it to shock you a little bit. Because, of course, we do put our hands on the children when we're just playing with them while we're talking to the parent, or when we're demonstrating something for the family, and at other times like that. But we should stop deluding ourselves from thinking that we teach the child for 1 hour a week. Because with little kids, we're not going to do 1 hour on one thing. Their attention span isn't good enough. So we might end up doing 6 10-minute things. So it's even shorter. How do you think you can teach a child anything in 10 minutes once a week? Impossible. But parents can get good ideas from us in that short amount of time because they're grown-ups. Another potential answer is to understand the purpose of early childhood visits, of early intervention visits. And so are you ready to type or write? The purpose of early intervention is to build the caregiver's capacity. That's the answer to that question. The purpose of early intervention is to build the caregiver's capacity. That way we understand that our primary target is the adult. And then the adult's work is with the child when we're not there. All right, next is the learning environment. So the learning environment, especially for children in childcare or preschool, is critically important. And have you ever heard of the model of early childhood centers called Reggio Emilia? Anyone ever heard of that? A few of you have. It's named after a place in northern Italy. And I love that approach, Reggio Emilia. And one of the sayings in Reggio Emilia is the classroom is the child's third teacher. So you can imagine the first teacher is the parent, second teacher is the teacher, and the third teacher is the environment. So it needs to be stimulating but not overstimulating. It needs to promote engagement, independence, and social relationships. I haven't been to any Korean classrooms yet, but I have been to other Southeast Asian classrooms, and they tend to be unbelievably boring. So they don't have a lot of cheerful places for children to play. And we've heard children learn through play, but in some classrooms they don't get to play. So there's an interesting cultural thing that I'm always debating, and that is the tension between learning through play and a focus on academics. And those two don't work together exactly well. Here is another interesting fact. What are the 2 countries that lead the world in children's performance on international tests when they get to be older, like when they're teenagers? The 2 leading educational countries in the world, Finland and Singapore. And their philosophies are completely opposite. So I happen to like the Finnish one. In the Finnish system, they don't start teaching reading till the child is 7 years old. If the child shows an interest earlier, they encourage it. But they don't actively try to make children learn to read early on. They have a lot of outdoor activities, a lot of play, a lot of free time, and then these children go on to do very, very well. In Singapore, it's the opposite. Fun time with children is considered a waste of time. It's maybe to get some energy out so they can spend more time sitting at a table doing activities. And the Singaporeans produce very good kids too. But what I think maybe actually is the difference is the status of the teachers in those 2 countries. To be a teacher in Singapore or a teacher in Finland is a high status occupation. They are respected by society and paid well by society. So that might be the joining factor. Okay, and then understanding how children learn best. So children learn best, I've already mentioned this a number of times, through repeated interactions with the environment distributed over time. They don't learn in massed trials, like over and over and over and over and over like that. When little kids learn a new skill, they like to practice it. They like to do it over and over. But the way to teach them isn't to do repeated tasks over and over. So flashcards should be burnt. Flashcard teaching is, what's this? What's this? What's this say? What's this? Like that. That is repeated interactions in massed trials. Children are going to learn to read, talk, and move if they're taught in the context of their everyday lives. All right, assessing child and family needs. All right, assessing child and family needs. So I've mentioned the routines-based interview. And so I'm going to mention the routines-based interview plus is what we call it. The EcoMap, RBI, recap, and goal decision making. So here is an example of an EcoMap. It's a pretty big family, so this isn't a great example maybe, but the nuclear family, the people who live with the child, are in the middle. And the informal supports are across here. So this is the father's brother and sister, the mother's sister and husband, the mother's parents, father's father, and then there are neighbors are up there, and there are two BFFs. Do you guys know what a BFF is? Come on, you watch American movies. Best friend forever. Best friend forever. The research on women's relationships consistently shows that friendships with other women are often very important to women. So we always ask the mother, who's your BFF? And sometimes they say, well, I have two. And I say, no, you can't have two. It's best friend forever. But, of course, I'm just joking. They can have two if they want. And then on the bottom are the formal supports. Formal supports are services, including medical, and including financial. So they are important. And in this case, the 2-year-old, had Down syndrome with associated medical problems, ear problems, heart problems, etc. And so here are some of the specialists here. These people here are the child and families service providers, the ongoing service providers. And the 12-year-old also had ADHD. Is that what yeah, I think it was ADHD. And so he also had some special services. But we weren't really as concerned about his special services as we were the 2-year-olds. And you notice that there are different thicknesses of lines. This mother pretty much loved everybody. So the wider the line, the more supportive the family felt, more supported the family felt by that person. You notice that here is a single line to Jack's father, because they did not have good relationships with Jack's father. So it just gets a single line. If it's a bad relationship, it gets a dot, a dashed line. I can't even see what that says now. So fat lines, moderate lines, thin lines, and dashed lines. So this is an EcoMap. And we do this at the beginning of the routines-based interview because this is all about the family. It's a way of saying, we don't want to talk right now. We want you to talk. We want to hear about your family. And In case any of you think that this is culturally inappropriate, I've been told numerous times that it was culturally inappropriate. And the people who tell me that do not represent the culture that they're talking about. So, for example, I'm often told that indigenous people might not want to talk about all of this. So I said, well, thank you for telling me that. Could I now please speak to an indigenous person? And then I talk to them and they say, no, that sounds good because families are really important in our culture. Okay, so let's proceed. And it turns out that it truly is a cross-cultural activity. That families in some cultures might not be used to talking about their friends and their extended family, but when they are faced with somebody who is obviously interested, obviously nice and helpful, and they know that ultimately it's to help the child, they're happy to participate in it, especially after the first one. In each routine, then we start talking about each routine of the day in the routines-based interview. In each routine, we're trying to find out the following information. What's everyone doing at this time? Who's there? If this is breakfast time, who is in the breakfast place? Where are the other people who live in the home? So that we understand the context for the parent and child. We try to find out how the child is engaged at this time of the day, but we don't use this direct question. We don't say, how is your child engaged at breakfast time? We ask lots of questions that are trying to elicit information about the child's engagement and independence and social relationships. So the really important point that I made there was you ask about these things indirectly, not directly. That comes from a long line of research about effective counseling interviewing. Yes, we also ask, on a scale of 1 to 5, how do you like this time of day? From 1 being terrible and 5 being great. Those scores are actually not important. At first we thought they would be, that we would be able to increase the scores of family satisfaction with their routines, but it turns out that they're very unstable data. But it's still a very useful way to say, okay, we're finished with this routine, we're ready to move on to another one. The recap, during the interview, we take notes. And here is an example of notes taken by my note taker while I was doing an interview, but I usually write my own notes. And so you can see that the notes are organized by, this is wake up time, wake up and bathroom time. And then you see that there are some things that have stars. The stars are the really important thing. They are concerns, things the child is not yet doing, or things the parent wants the child to be doing, or things that we think sound a little funny that the parent might want to choose as goals at the end. But these are not goals. Make sure you understand that. They're just concerns. Goals get chosen later. So, for example, at this time, the parent said the child is getting potty trained, toilet trained. Likes toothbrushing, but doesn't help and resists with toothbrushing. Throws a fit when trying to help, when the parent is trying to help. Hours brushing teeth. The child would spend hours brushing his teeth if allowed, etc. So the notes are really important. And then in the recap at the very end, we use the notes and go very quickly through these stars. We identify the routine and go through the stars as a reminder of what was included in the conversation, because next the parent's going to choose goals. The parent chooses the goals. Usually they can think, because they've just been talking about child functioning and family life, they can usually think about maybe 5 or 6 goals, and we tell them we're looking for 10 to 12 goals. But they can only come up with about 5 to 6 or something. So then we hand them the notes and we say, look through that and see if you want to add anything. And then they might add 3 or 4. And then the third stage is we do joint attention. We look at the notes together. And it gives me, as the interviewer, an opportunity to say, you know, it sounded to me like you were really concerned about this thing that's happening at bath time. So when we have joint attention, we are looking at the notes with the parents. And this is one that I did. This one ended up with, I think, 10. Is that the top number? Yeah. So we just write down the goals that the parents choose, and then we go back and say, put them in order of priority. What's the most important one to you? So in this case, it was the third thing that they mentioned that was the most important to them, using words instead of tantrums. But look, this is an important reason why we have so many goals. Number 4 is way down here. If we had stopped up here somewhere, we would never have got to this one, which is the parents' 4th priority. It was making transition. Oh, making a transition when dad comes home and in outings. So it's another good reason for having 10 to 12 outcomes, because it gets the whole picture. Now, on each visit, we do not work on all of these outcomes. We might only work on 2, 3, or 4 on any one visit. But at least we know the order of importance. And in fact, once we type this up, we type it in order of importance. So that would be at the top, then number 2 would be next, number 3 would be next, and 4, and so on. So every time we look at the list, they're in order of importance. Here's the matrix I was talking about. So here you have a short version of the goals. Here we have the home routines, but you can also put classroom routines in there. And the X's show the routines that are targeted for that goal. Now, is there a language one on here? Use one word or sign. So somebody might say, well, we can do that in every routine. Yes, you can. But if you do that, you are going to have an overwhelming matrix. It's going to be a lot to keep up with. So we asked the parent at which times of the day would using one word or sign be most helpful for you or for your child. You notice that some goals don't have any X's. Why? Why do they not have any routines? Can you read them? I don't know if you can read English, but they are the family outcomes, family goals. So family goals do not have to be tied to routines. They're often bigger than just functioning in routines. Okay, I mentioned the MISER earlier. This is the measure of engagement, independence, and social relationships. It's a huge tool. We are in conversation about trying to have a Korean version of the MISER. So here is an example. This is waking up time. It's the very first routine. There are 14 routines on the MISER. The skills, the functional skills are listed in age order. So this is the typical starting age in months. So it starts with even at newborn all the way up. And the 3 scoring options are the child does not do this yet, the child does this sometimes, or the child does this often, or is beyond this. Because there are some skills that children do, and then they stop doing them, like crawling, for example. Once they learn to walk, they don't crawl anymore, more or less. And each item is crosswalked by the functional domains, engagement, independence, and social relationships. Developmental domains, cognitive, communication, motor, social, and adaptive, and the federal outcomes that the American system uses. So if you want to summarize the child's functioning by developmental domain, you could do that because they're crosswalked. I don't like developmental domains because I don't really understand what a cognitive skill is with young children because they have to demonstrate it in some motoric way. So I really like the functional EISR, remember? Engagement, independence, and social relationships. But the main thing is that we can find out what the percentage of skills are. The percentage of skills is that the child can complete in a routine. And when you reassess the child, you would expect that percentage to go up, for example. I will say one more thing about the scoring of the MISER, though. A very useful thing to do also is what percentage of skills in each routine can a child do up to the child's age? So if it's percentage of skills in the routine from birth to 3, then the percentage would increase all the time. But if it's the percentage of skills up to the child's age, because the age is going to be 6 months higher the next time we do a MISER, then there are more items now and the percentage stays about the same. So if a child can do about 80% of the items up to the child's age, the next time we do the MISER, it probably would still be around 80%, which is good. If early intervention is really, really successful, even that 80% will increase. So in other words, we have helped the child increase functioning even beyond what was expected from when the child came into the program. Let's talk now about the primary service provider. One of the hardest concepts in the routines-based model. It is used in most of the countries that are implementing the model. In New Zealand and Australia, they call it the key worker. And it's in Spain and Portugal, it's called the profesional de referencia, the professional of reference. And in the United States, it's the primary service provider. So, oh yeah, this is just trying to point out that there is a book about this by my friends Rush and Melissa Sheldon that was published in 2013, but I like to point out that 10 years earlier I was writing about it, just to let them know. Okay, so here are the principles. One person sees the caregiver weekly. We like weekly visits. Sometimes families want it to be less frequent, but our default for planning purposes is weekly visits. And the role release means you happily teach caregivers to use your strategies, and here's the important part, and trust your colleagues to support those caregivers. So here is an example where we have a caregiver whose primary service provider is a speech-language pathologist. But this speech-language pathologist is not alone. He or she has an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, an early childhood special educator, in some countries a psychologist, a social worker, other people to help when needed. But it's whoever was chosen as the primary service provider, that's the one who sees the family every week. In my opinion, the best form of consultation is the joint visit. So if I'm working with a family and I decide that I really need a speech therapist to help with something, we're running into some problems that I'm not too sure about, the speech therapist would come with me, and that visit is all about the speech therapist. And so we make sure that the speech therapist knows what the questions are. The speech therapist asks lots of questions of the parent, maybe talks to the child somewhat, and then makes some suggestions. They usually don't do a very good job. The other team members don't do a great job at collaborative consultation because that takes time, and they want to do things quickly. So they will make a number of suggestions, and my job as the primary service provider is to make sure we know in what routines these suggestions might be helpful or the parent would like to see them done. And then it might be that on the next visit, we go through the speech therapist's suggestions so that the parent can pick one or two that she's interested in. So that was role release, remember? That's believing that other people can do what you do. So let's say I'm a physical therapist. I might think, well, I'm a physical therapist. Only I can come up with suggestions about walking. Well, that's not really true. How many of you in here work with children or families? Put up your hand. Waiting for the translation. How many of you work with children or families? Full extension of your upper extremities. Okay. How many of you have children of your own? Okay. So people who have children of their own have some knowledge about how to help a child learn to walk. Remember when your child used to fall over? I think that the reason for diapers is not for catching poop, it's for protecting the child when he falls down on his butt. Okay, role acceptance is the other side of the coin. Role acceptance means even though I was trained to be, let's say, an occupational therapist, for example, and somebody wants me to help the family with something about language, I should accept that role because we're interested in children's overall functioning and participation. I shouldn't just be interested in a child's fine motor skills or sensory abilities. So we say that the primary service provider should be able to work with this kind of kid, that kind of kid, another kind of kid, and yet another. So the primary service provider can work with any type of child if they are well prepared. All right, now, collaborative consultation. This is versus the expert consultation. In routines-based home visits, remember we have the family set the agenda. We find out what the focus of the visit is because that was on our form that we completed the previous week. I'll show you that form in a minute. We review the interventions. Look at this format. We review the interventions, and the child might demonstrate. The parent might want us to see how the child functions. That's child demonstration, and the parent might want us to watch them helping the child. That would be caregiver demonstration. We use collaborative consultation to develop strategies that the parent can use. We plan for the next visit. And here's that form I was telling you about. So we call this the next steps form. On the left side, we write what we did today and progress on any goals discussed. So this is what we did today. I usually begin this with update. I write the word update, and the parent tells me how the child has been doing before, in the previous week, and I write that information in there. And then I document anything we did today, and so we always follow the rule, who did what, when, and that we fill that in. And just shorthand, not long, not elaborate sentences, just shorthand. On this panel, what we will do from now until the next visit. And this is when the family has shown an interest in a strategy, and and so we say, so is this something that you're interested in doing with your child? They say yes. We ask the feasibility, the plausibility and feasibility questions, which are, do you think this will work? And with everything else you have going on at this time of the day, do you think you will be able to do this? And if they say yes to both of those, we write it down. We write down the strategy, and we write it down like this. Jill that's the mother's name. Jill said she will do blah, 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 whatever the strategy is, to make it clear that it's not homework. We're not putting homework on the right-hand side. We're putting down what the family said they wanted to do with their kid. And that might be 1 to 4 or 5 things. It depends on the situation. And this one down here is the plan for the next visit. So then when I go to next week's visit, I know what they wanted to discuss. I know what they were working on in the past week, or what they said they were going to work on. And that makes an easy transition into the next visit. My planning really is just to review this and be ready to discuss these things. So it's the documentation of the visit, the reminder of the commitment on the right-hand panel, and the agenda for the next visit. Who sets the agenda? The family, yeah. Okay. So regardless of location, whether it's in the home, in classrooms, or in a clinic, the purpose, remember, is to build the caregiver's capacity. So that's what we always make sure that professionals have in their heads. The purpose of the visits is to build the caregiver's capacity, not to provide treatment to the child or teach the child. We emphasize the quantity of interactions and the quality of interactions between the family and professional. The family chooses the goals, and we develop strategies through collaborative consultation, not directive expert consultation. And we use the next steps form. Collaborative consultation to children's classrooms. We call that CC2CC. There are a lot of similarities with home visits, but a few differences, because the teacher doesn't get to make the same decisions, all the same decisions as the parent. We always have a ground rules conversation with the teacher, because sometimes teachers are frustrated at the professionals who come into their classroom. And sometimes early intervention professionals are frustrated at the teachers, because the teachers ignore them, for example. So we sit down and say, okay, I'm going to be coming to your classroom once a week or whatever. What are your expectations for me? And I'll tell you what my hopes are for you. So, for example, if the teacher says, I'm glad you're coming to my classroom, I would like you to take this badly behaved child out. We say, sorry, I can't do that. That's not why I'm coming here, to be an expensive babysitter. And we also know that pull-out services are useless anyway. So there's some negotiation that happens. But if you don't have that conversation, then people are operating on false assumptions. We try very hard to establish good relationships with the teachers. We say to our people, this should be the best hour of the teacher's week. We have research that shows that the better the relationship between the early intervention professional and the classroom teacher or childcare teacher, the more likely the teacher is to implement the strategies, the interventions, and the more likely the child is to make progress. We see a direct link from the relationship to implementation by the teacher to child progress. When we're not talking to the teacher, because the teacher can't be expected to talk to us for a whole hour while she's got a bunch of kids in here, what we do is we join our target child in whatever the child is already engaged in. And we play with the child, we observe the child. We might try out some interventions before discussing them with the teacher. And we complete the next steps form, that same form. So here is a completed one. This one happens to be typed. And so I want to mention COVID to you for a minute, because that's related to this. So this is, the details don't matter, but this is what we did today, and the progress is up here. This is what, is this a teacher or a parent? This is home. So this is actually the parent one. This is what the parent said she was going to do, and this is what the parent wants to be the focus of the next visit. So I would have this in preparation for my next visit. Right, in a clinic-based visit, same purpose, remember, to build the caregiver's capacity. It's a meeting, not a direct hands-on intervention session. And in case you're wondering, well, why isn't it? If they're coming into a clinic, why aren't we doing direct hands-on? Okay, let me draw the 7 circles again. And that little, that's why we're not spending our time doing direct hands-on. We're spending our time building the caregiver's capacity to have strategies that she can use throughout the day. So we might have some action. We like action on a visit. Action could be seeing what the child can do, seeing what the parent does, and me as the professional demonstrating something that the parent might be interested in, and then the parent might practice it in the clinic, but then she takes that home with her to use. I don't pretend like I can do anything helpful for the child in a 1-hour visit. 7 circles. The agenda is the families using the next steps form, because remember the family was the one who said what they wanted the focus of this visit to be and what they were going to work on. So action, I just mentioned that. Hoosiers rule. Have any of you seen an American movie called Hoosiers? It's a basketball movie. It's a sports movie. It's really great. It's one of the best sports movies that was ever made. And it's about a guy played by Gene Hackman, the actor, who goes to take over a basketball program in Indiana. And the kids, the high school kids on this basketball team shoot the ball as soon as they get the ball. They go up the court and shoot the ball, even though they shouldn't have, because maybe a defender was in the way or they were too far away from the basket. So what should they have done instead? Pass the ball. So he says, pass the ball. And so the kids would go up there, they'd freeze, and then they say, oh yes, I'm supposed to pass the ball. And they would pass the ball to their teammate. And they weren't used to passing on this team. And so the teammate would get it, and the first thing the kid would do is pop it up, even though he shouldn't have. So finally the coach says, 4 times before anybody takes a shot. And he's dead serious about this. So the ball has to be passed 4 times before anybody can shoot it. So what does this have to do with early intervention? All right, there's Gene Hackman. How many times are you going to pass the ball before we shoot? What's the answer? 4. Now let's change the coach. How many questions are we going to ask before we make a suggestion? Try that. It's really hard. We are so used to being helpful, we have experience, we have knowledge, that when I listen to a parent or a teacher start to tell me about a problem with a child, I'm already thinking solutions, because I have that kind of experience. And I desperately want to tell the parent, give the parent some suggestions. And when I was in my 20s, when I was first in early intervention, I knew everything. I was in my 20s, so I knew everything. And so I would give suggestions very quickly to parents. And they would go, oh, okay. And then I'd go back the next week and I would say, so how did it work with that intervention we talked about? And they would look around and you could tell they hadn't used it. From the very beginning, they knew they weren't going to use it. It wasn't going to fit into their routine, or maybe they'd already tried it, or whatever. My problem was I didn't have any self-regulation. I should have got more information, more context, before making a suggestion. So we still make a suggestion, but we have context. That's the purpose of the 4 questions, is to have enough context to be able to make a good suggestion for the family. We're much more aware nowadays of some issues about equity that I want to just end with. So these aren't so new family-centered practices, but they are important. Equity, as I just mentioned. Ableism, so that is, it's like discrimination based on a person's ability. Structural racism. In the United States, we're dealing with this a lot. Intersectionality, the combination of characteristics. For example, if you're poor and you have a disability and you are a woman in a situation where women are not treated well, that's a combination of things called intersectionality. Discrete, which is looking at disabilities not as disabilities, but as abilities. And the autistic people have become very strong at this now, saying that autistic people need to be honored and respected for their different ways of thinking. The deaf, for a long time in the United States, we call it the capital D deaf, who identify with the culture of deafness. It's that kind of issue. The implicit bias, which is not knowing what your biases are, and then that was all listed by Carol Trivet. And this is the work that I've been doing most recently, and that's looking at expert consultation versus collaborative consultation, how these 2 types of consultation are manifested using discourse analysis, with the conclusion that expert consultation leads to a reliance on professionals by parents, which leads to inequity. This is keeping parents in their place, while we professionals can wave our credentials in front of caregivers. I have a PhD, or I have a license to practice occupational therapy, or whatever those credentials are. People are very proud of them, and they tend to use those to maintain a power imbalance between families and professionals. In collaborative consultation, it leads to family confidence, which leads to family quality of life, which leads to equity. So it's our way of explaining the importance of collaborative consultation through an equity lens. So conclusions about equity is approach caregivers with humility. Develop strategies with caregivers, not for them. Stay alert to your behaviors that make caregivers dependent on you. And consider the ways our profession keeps caregivers in their place. Use collaborative consultation to promote equity. Conclusion. Assess child functioning in everyday routines and family needs. Okay, assign a primary service provider, not providers. Build caregivers' capacity. In classrooms, educate children with disabilities with children without disabilities. Inclusion. Don't pull children out for therapies. Capitalize on the fact that children learn through play. Stay in touch by going to this website. And now I think we have time for any questions, right?
네, 저희가 지금 서비스를 제공하고 있는데, 그렇다면 일과 기반의 조기 개입 서비스를 제공하기 위해서 주 서비스 제공자의 전문성을 향상하기 위해 우리는 무엇을 준비하고 더 강화해야 하는지 질문 드립니다.
Is the question about professional development to prepare professionals to implement the model? Yes? We pay a lot of attention to checklist training And that involves observing people, working with families or children, checking their behaviors on the checklist, and giving them feedback. So if you go to that website, you will find about 20 checklists for all the different practices that we have. We are convinced that lecturing people, like I am doing to you, is not highly effective for training. It's good for information and sometimes for inspiring people, but training requires observation and feedback, and the checklists are the backbone of that. Thank you.
저는 직장 어린이집에서 근무를 하고 있는데요. 직장 어린이집은 이제 아이들이 가정보다 어린이집에서 더 지내는 시간이 더 길고 그렇기 때문에 이제 가정에서보다 이제 조기 개입이 좀 더 유용할 수 있다는 주 양육자로서의 이제 위치에 교사가 있다고 생각할 수도 있다고 생각합니다. 그런데 이제 부모님들이 내 아이가 이제 조금 다른 아이들과 다르다는 것을 이제 인정하지 않고 그냥 조금 다를 뿐이다. 이제 그 정도 선에서 생각을 하고 계셔가지고 어린이집의 일상에서 장애와 비장애아가 이제 같이 그냥 진행을 해도 되는지 그것이 궁금합니다.
Yeah, you have raised a lot of important questions with that question. So number one, if the child spends a lot of time in daycare, then that teacher is the beneficiary of the PSP. So the PSP is going to visit the classroom. We don't say visit the child, we say visit the classroom, because really the focus is still the adult in there, you, the teacher. Second, you raise the issue of parents not knowing about some needs the child might have at school because maybe those same needs don't show up at home. So that's always been an issue for us, is how to approach parents when we see a concern that they don't see. And our model doesn't really have a very good solution for that. Third is when the early intervention professional goes to the childcare program, to the daycare, they fill out that next steps form. And what we do is, they don't fill it, the early interventionist fills it out and leaves a copy for the teacher, of course, because that has on there what the teacher said she was going to do. And we send a copy home to the family. So that way the family has on that form a summary of what happened on that visit. A fourth point I want to make is that just because a child has a concern in one setting does not necessarily mean that it's a concern in the other setting. A lot of people think we need parents to be working on the same things that we are. Maybe not. Maybe the child is doing just fine in the home setting compared to the classroom. In the classroom, we've got a whole bunch of little unpredictable people called peers, other children. In the home, they might not have that. So we can't expect parents to be working on the same things that we are because there might not be the needs there. If it turns out that they do have similar needs to what we see in the classroom, then we should work together to come up with strategies. But the strategies might be different. The strategies can even be different for one goal in different routines of the classroom or different routines of the home. So children vary their behavior by setting. Thank you for that question.
오늘 준비하신 내용에서 놀이의 중요성은 못 들은 것 같아서 간략하게라도 듣고 싶고, 그 주 서비스 제공자가 물리치료에서 시작해서 언어치료사, 작업치료사 이렇게 넘어가지 않는다고 말씀해 주셨는데 그 이유도 궁금합니다.
Okay, all your colleagues are going to hate you now because you have just basically said, could you stay here till 4 o'clock talking about play? No, sorry. Obviously, there is a lot of information about play. I will try to make well, you have it there. You can see in the booklet the information about play. If you want more information about that, write to me. And you can write in Korean because, you know, we've got Google Translate. We can figure that out. But I will elaborate on the changing of PSP. The research is clear that the quality and length of the relationship between an early intervention professional and the family is extremely important. It predicts the family's satisfaction with early intervention, but it also predicts their well-being, the ultimate well-being. So we think that that's more important than always trying to find a match between the current needs of the child and the background of the professional. Because do you remember I said a PSP should be able to work with this kind of kid, that kind of kid, another kind of kid, etc. So if a child starts off with a physical therapist as the PSP and the concerns move over into language, the parent has a relationship with the physical therapist, so that person stays in place. And it's the physical therapist's responsibility to get help as needed from the speech therapist, and the speech therapist's responsibility to pass on, to help this PSP. So this model really promotes the idea that early interventionists are specialists in their own area and generalists in all the other areas. And they're not alone. They have a team. So that's why we don't change.
저희가 함께 이렇게 조기 개입 서비스를 제공하는 그 전문가 인력의 영아일 경우에는 의료적인 접근을 할 수 있는 전문가도 함께 해야 할 것 같은데 하는 궁금함이 항상 있었거든요. 뭐 간호사라든지 좀 중증의 아이들의 경우, 그리고 그런 것들이 가정에서 부모에게 교육되면 훨씬 더 효과적일 것 같은데 그런 부분에 대해서는 항상 좀 잘 구성되지 않는 것 같아서 좀 궁금해서 질문드립니다.
So in the United States, we have a law that supports early intervention. And in that law, 17 disciplines are listed. We mostly use 4. Early childhood special education, occupational therapy, physical therapy, and speech therapy. But that's 4 out of 17. We have 13 other services that are supposed to be available for children and families when they need them, including nursing, dietitian or nutritionist. I was just talking to people yesterday about how difficult it is to find a pediatric nutritionist. And of course, we need audiologists, medical doctors, etc. They should all be available, but they don't see the family all the time. And what I've been talking about is ongoing service provision. But you're exactly right. Korea still needs to develop an integrated holistic system, and they should include the medical and medical allied professions in what's available to children in early intervention. You're exactly right.
오늘 그 어린이집이나 유치원의 기관을 방문해서 RBI를 진행한다는 것에 대해서 굉장히 관심이 많았는데 이 RBI가 가족의 역량을 강화하는 것이 주 목표라고 들었는데요. 그러면 유치원이나 어린이집에 방문했을 때 교사를 매개로 하여 가족의 역량을 강화하는 것인지 아니면 교사가 직접 그 방문자가 주 서비스 제공자가 오지 않을 때 어린이집이나 기관에서 아이를 어떻게 다뤄야 되는지를 가르쳐 주는 것인지에 대해서 조금 궁금합니다.
That's why Korea needs an early intervention system, so that a classroom isn't left without a resource. So yes, ideally when you're training teachers, they should be able to meet the needs of various kinds of children. And we emphasize teaching them incidental teaching, where they follow the child's lead and elicit more from the child. And so incidental teaching can be used with any child, with any ability level, in any routine. So it's a very useful general teaching practice. So look up incidental teaching, and that would be one of the most helpful things for them to have. We have an engagement classroom model, so we have a model for how to manage a classroom of typically developing children, mixed typically and developing or not typically developing. And that includes incidental teaching and a few other strategies. So if you look on the website, look under the classroom section of the materials page. So you go to the website, find the materials page, and that's where all the resources are listed, including classroom ones. Last question, so thank you guys.
네. 네. 조기 개입의 기본적인 이념에 대해서 박사님의 해안을 통해서 성찰할 수 있을 뿐만 아니라 또 실제적인 부분에서도 굉장히 많은 도움을 얻었던 그런 시간이었습니다. 불과 몇 달 전까지만 해도 제가 맥밀리엄 박사님을 한국에서 뵙게 될 거라는 생각을 전혀 할 수가 없었습니다. 예, 그리고 공항에 마중 나가서 뵙기 전까지만 해도 그랬는데요. 이렇게 또 이런 자리에서 박사님의 강의를 듣게 되어서 정말 영광입니다. 여러분 그렇지 않습니까? 네, 그럼 박수 한번 더 부탁드립니다. 네, 감사합니다.